Super. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Kara Higgins. Kara and I talked not too long ago, and I'm so excited to have her here. You guys are going to really enjoy this presentation. I think it's just some really valuable information, no matter where you're coming from. And so Kara is a mother of 6 children, biological, adopted, and fostered. Kara has been trained and certified in cultivating connection, a parent-to-parent program under the umbrella of Empowered to Connect, which I know several of you know about because we have a program around here, or a conference that comes down here, I should say. She has more than 24 years of experience as an international healthcare provider and orphan care advocate. She and her husband founded Imana. Am I saying that right?
Yep, you got it.
Awesome. It's an orphan care ministry, an educational sponsorship program in Rwanda, and a focus on trauma-informed interventions, learning, and care, setting it apart from other international orphan care programs. So that's pretty amazing. So I'm going to let Kara take it away, and we'll get started.
Oh, thank you for having me. And I'm sorry it's kind of dark here. It's everybody else in my house is asleep, so I had to kind of turn the lights down. But I'm super excited to be here. And it was fun to connect with Kristen and Eric because we seem to have a lot in common. Married to teachers, paved our own roads when we saw a need for a nonprofit. So I'm really glad to be here with you all tonight, spending a little bit of time. So as Kristen said, I am mom to 6 kids. I'm also a women's nurse practitioner and a certified nurse midwife. And that's and part-time do deliver babies in a super large community health center. So a lot of my women that I care for are refugees and immigrants. So a lot of basically every avenue of my life, I work with people who've had a lot of trauma, whether it's patients or my own children or the kids in our program in East Africa. And so I am TBRI certified facilitator and then a parent-to-parent coordinator. And you can go on to the next slide, Eric. Should be one of my fans. Okay, so this is my crew. And this is how we got here, part of it. Starting at the top with the kiddo with the tie-dye, that's my son Ezekiel. He is adopted from Rwanda. The littler guy between him next to over with the glasses is Makosa. We had legal guardianship of him right before the pandemic happened. He was had dual citizenship in Japan and in America, and knew a missionary in Japan that was a friend of ours, and they said, hey, could you take this kid because he doesn't really fit in Osaka. He looks African and he needs some mentoring and some family. And so we said, yeah, we'll be his exchange family. So we did like an exchange program, and then the pandemic happened. And his mom was like, yeah, I'm done with him. I'm done raising him. You can keep him. And so we became his legal guardians when he was 16. So obviously he's got quite a story too. And then the bigger guy with the afro is Etienne. He's also from Rwanda. The blonde is my biological son, Blake. He's 18 and he has quite a bit. He has a lot of birth trauma and early hospital medical trauma. And then he has quite a bit of secondary trauma because of some of the stuff he's gone through with his siblings. And then the cutie girl is my Molly, my firstborn. She's 20 and she's in college. She's in grad school and she is on the autism spectrum. She also has a lot of secondary trauma. And she was a micro preemie, and so she had some birth trauma as well. And then our little baby bird, we adopted her through foster care, and she is she's everybody, the apple of everybody's eye, but she is a handful, and she has all those boys wrapped around her fingers. So we learned pretty early on. We always knew that we were going to grow our family in non-traditional ways, that we were going to adopt. And then after having a couple biological kids that had a lot of complex medical stuff going on and trauma, and then growing our family through adoption, we had some pretty dark painful years. And I know you guys understand that you can, you get these kids in these situations and it doesn't look like what you thought it would parenting would be like. And you kind of can feel like you're on an island, because everybody else is parenting differently than you have to parent. And so, we kind of navigated that for a while and started to recognize that we really needed to become, more explore other ways to help our kids heal. We were doing all of the therapies, all the counseling, all of the books, all the podcasts. And eventually, we ended up at an Empowered to Connect conference like Kristen referenced. And that weekend, we were just like, well, we have nothing to lose. Let's give it a try. And so my husband, we came home and he installed a whole bunch of, like a tire swing for the sensory needs that we were learning about. And we like put a trampoline in one of our rooms and we just like kind of went crazy. We started reading every book we could, started trying a little bit of what we were learning about and started to feel like, gosh, this, maybe there's something here. Like, we might be onto something. And the more that we started to change how we saw our kids' behaviors, the more that we started to see them respond in ways where we could tell that they were starting to feel safe. And so these are how we got here. And so a couple years ago, parents started reaching out to me, asking me, could I talk them through things? And it got to be a little bit much, in my spare time. So I went ahead and started formally doing coaching and workshops and speaking engagements, because we have a lot of crazy stories, with this crew and with starting a nonprofit in East Africa. And that's a whole nother story and a whole nother, that's an amazing thing that's going on in Rwanda. So you can go to the next slide, Eric. So this is, TBRI is trust-based relational interventions, and it's out of Texas Christian University, is where Dr. Karen Purvis originally did her work. And what it is it is an evidence-based, attachment-rich model of care that we use for any child, young adult, teenager, that has experienced trauma. And it is any kind of trauma. So you can go, I'll let the video speak for itself. You could start the video.
Okay. Intervention has at its core building a trusting relationship. It has 3 sets of principles, and they look at the child as a whole. When you think about development, the baby cries, and I say, yes, I will comfort you. And so this child learns that they have a voice. They learn trust, which is the lesson of the first year of life. I can trust. There are so many children from hard places. And for those children, their capacity to trust has been fiercely damaged. The brain chemistry of a child who cries and no one comes is dramatically altered. The child with a history of trauma or loss or abuse has no hope of healing without a nurturing relationship. In every way that I make time and space, that I give touch, eye contact, and I give words, I am going to empower this child to go back to the beginning of what he or she should have experienced in the arms of a loving parent that said, when you cry, I will come. The phenomenal thing about a trust-based intervention is, as we connect to this child, as we build safety, we actually change the brain chemistry. We change the wiring of the brain. This is really the heart and soul of all that we are and all that we do. Do I look into the child's eyes? Do I touch their arm when I talk to them? When they talk to me, do I stop what I'm doing and talk to them? This is the essence of mindfulness. The excitatory chemicals about I'm afraid, I'm hungry, I'm cold, those are balanced when the caregiver comes and gives warmth. All regulation occurs first with an external regulator. So in the beginning, I regulate all. They're cold, I bring warmth. They're crying, I bring myself. And out of my regulation, their brain develops capacity for self-regulation. If this child didn't have this experience, that child doesn't feel safe. This chemistry can be altered first by knowing they're safe. Second, by nutrient-rich foods. Third, by my environmental regulation of that child's emotion. And fourth, by appropriate exercise. So we can balance brain chemistry by creating a holistic environment. We clearly have to deal with behavior. Correcting means showing a child the right behavior, praising him when he gets it, and showing it to him until he can get it right, and showing him with no fear and no shame, so that he builds success, not a greater sense of failure. So the message of hope for our families is that we can help our children to dramatic levels of healing. We simply have to be devoted to it and be willing to invest what it's going to take.
Okay. So that sounds, it sounds really makes sense, logical, but putting it into practice looks a lot different, especially if you have a child that's not a child anymore. They're 15 or they're 17, or you have a child that's been in and out of the hospital their whole lives, or you have one that can't communicate verbally. And what an amazing thing that has happened since TBRI started. Initially, Dr. Purvis's work was geared towards children who had experienced a lot of trauma, and initially kids who were adopted or in foster care. However, as she began sharing this idea and people started putting it into practice, it began to branch out to include a whole lot more than just kids in foster care and from institutional settings. And a whole lot more people started benefiting from it than just families who had adopted or fostered, because we know that trauma is a whole lot more than that. So you can go to the next slide, Eric. So there are a lot of different types of trauma. And I think it's kind of even a catchphrase right now. I feel like you hear it a lot right now in the schools and the education world. Basically, trauma begins with a stressful event. The person experiences it. And then based on their own personal histories, their own personalities, they're going to experience that differently. It's like pain. We all experience pain differently. And so in the short of it is, trauma is how someone experiences an event that happens to them. And it's important to remember that there's a lot of different types of trauma. And I wanted to touch on that because I know that not all of you, some of you may be in and out of hospitals all the time, or clinics or therapy. And so I wanted to make sure that I pointed that out, that we just quickly, an acute trauma is a trauma that is a one and done type thing. Somebody's in a horrific car accident, or they experience an earthquake. A chronic trauma is something that's ongoing, like food insecurities, or like just resource scarcity, or even having a family member with a terminal illness. And then that's not quite the same as a complex trauma. A complex trauma is one that's ongoing, trauma over and over. This is a lot of times caregivers maybe who have mental illnesses, a domestic violence, abuse. Those are complex traumas. And then the secondary or the vicarious trauma, this is probably going to hit home with a lot of you. This is the people that are caregivers to someone who has a lot of needs. These are the people who are dealing with someone else that has a lot of high needs and complex issues. So we see this like with healthcare workers, or parents who are parenting kids with trauma, or kids with mental illness or significant health issues. And then collective trauma, when we talk about collective trauma, this is entire groups of people who have experienced something. So when we're thinking about Israel and Palestine, those groups, or we're thinking about, for my family, Rwanda, the genocide is an example of a collective trauma. Then we have our generational trauma. Generational trauma is those things that are passed down, terrible behaviors that families pass on because that's all they've ever known, abuse that is passed on because that's how their family operates. And so just to point out, there's a lot of different types of trauma. And I think at this point in time post-pandemic, most all of our kids have had at least a couple adverse childhood events that they're overcoming now. And so when we are talking about Dr. Purvis in that little video, she mentioned a little bit of the attachment cycle. And I don't know any of y'all's backgrounds, but the attachment cycle, the healthy one is on the left, that secure attachment style cycle. So your child cries and you go and you pick them up. That is the situation. They're expressing it. The need is prompted. They cry. They're stressed out. You go, you pick them up, you meet their need, and they learn that they can trust you. They learn that they have a voice and that their feelings matter. And so that's a secure attachment style. Every time that you meet your child's need, every time a kid someone responds to a child and meets their need, they're working on that secure attachment cycle. So a disruptive attachment cycle, we have our child in the relaxed state, and then a situation arises and that child expresses the need because they are stressed out. So they're hurt, they're scared, they're hungry, they're thirsty, and no one comes, or they cannot respond in ways that meet that child's need. And though that child begins to just stay in a stressed, anxious, worried state all the time, they learn not to trust anybody. This can then look like apathy. It can look like a child who doesn't care. It can look like a child who's angry all the time, who's scared all the time, who's hyper vigilant and ready to fight all the time because they have learned that they don't have a voice. And so this isn't just, typically people are thinking of a child in a giant orphanage in a developing country, but this can also be a child that is held down because they have a medical procedure and they're scared and they can't have their mom pick them up and comfort them because that medical procedure has to happen to keep them healthy. It can look like a child who's in a classroom and no one understands what they're saying and they're trying to communicate, but no one understands. That is a disruptive attachment cycle. That gets me every time because these kids, they don't have anyone to hear their voice. So they learn they don't have a voice. They learn their voice doesn't matter. Okay, you can go to the next slide. It's actually hard for me to look at you, Kristen, because then you make me want to cry. I put this picture. This is my baby bird. This is what she looked like for about 2 years, trying to get her to calm down or sleep. She had to be facing out. You can see how rigid her little body was. And I'm pointing this out because I want you all to, one of the caveats of TBRI and connected parenting is that we change our lens in how we see our children's behaviors. And that difficult behavior is actually trying to tell you that there's an unmet need. And a lot of the times our kids are scared. A lot of times that is fear. And fear is more than a feeling. It is a state of being. It is like taking over our kids, and it can bully our children into misbehaviors. It can bully our children into this power struggle and into just these difficult behaviors because it's so overwhelming and overcoming to them. And I think this picture of my little birdie is a good example of that. I usually will also explain it as like, if you're in a haunted house and you know things are coming, but you still have that physical response and you can't do anything about it, or you're on a roller coaster and it drops out and you have that physical feeling and you know that you can't do anything about it. It's that physical feeling. That's what it's like for our kids when they're just stuck in that constant state of fear. And so my little birdie, she was only with her biological mom for 6 months. She did have to go back and forth for visits a couple times a week for a year and a half. So we would make some progress and then she would be re-traumatized or re-exposed to those things. And so even though it was only 6 months, even though she was a baby, that's irrelevant. Because that first year of life and even prenatally in the womb, we know that children are experiencing what their moms experience. We know that women who have heightened stress levels are passing that on to their babies. And so If you have someone that says, oh, well, your baby was a little when that happened, or oh, they aren't going to remember that, you can send them to me and I will go to bat for you and your kid every day. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so when that attachment cycle is fractured or it never happens, what we are working with is somebody whose lower brain, their survival brain, is hyperactive all the time, and that upper brain is underdeveloped. So the beauty in all of this is that we can continue to learn and change until the day we die. Our upper brains can be retrained, relearned, and can gain information all the time, all the time. And so that is what our goal is. Our goal is to get our kids to be in a state of relaxation where they're not operating out of their lower brain, and to help start giving them more experiences in their upper brain that they can fall back on. Because our lower brain is what we're born with. Our lower brain is our survival mode. It's largely instinctual. It's what seeks to survive. It seeks nurturing. It seeks all of our basic needs and feeling safe and secure. Our upper brain is where we have our emotions, our logic, our reasoning, our cause and effect, and it's influenced entirely by our experiences around us. And so when you have even just that basic understanding, I imagine that makes a lot of sense to any of you who've worked with kids. Of course, if they've only ever been just trying to survive, of course it's hard for them to have like common sense. Of course it's difficult to connect the dots and to make to do that executive functioning, because they haven't been given the experiences to grow that part of their brain. And so we're working on, when we take when you take classes and you start learning more about TDRI, you start looking at how can I help my child feel safe and switch out of that lower brain so that we can start making more connections and working in our upper brain. Are you guys tracking with me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So with the connecting practices, these are the nine caveats that we go through, that we teach our families, our caregivers, not just parents, but caregivers, teachers, social workers, medical providers, to use this framework when we are trying to help kids to heal and to build a attachment. And so that be curious is one that when we have a mindset of curiosity, we tend to be less angry, because we're just putting on this idea of what's this kid saying right now? How's this kid in this moment? And what am I like right now? And what is my story bringing to this attachment dance? So we always have this lens of curiosity about behaviors and about sticky situations. We learn to balance nurturing with structure. I think people who know me probably would say that I say this is not free range parenting a lot, because I think that sometimes people think attachment, TVRI, connected parenting is like no discipline. That's not it. The difference is that you learn to balance when your child needs structure versus when they need nurture. And if a kid really needs nurturing and you're coming in with more structure and rules, they're just going to put up their walls. And so it's learning to balance and recognizing that 15-year-old with his hood up that doesn't want to talk to you might actually just need you to give them some TLC, but it doesn't look like rocking them like your baby. It looks like buying them a Blizzard and playing video games with them. And so we're working on balancing nurture and structure and meeting kids in their developmental where they're at. And then moving across, like I said, meeting their needs, being curious about maybe they're not really mad at the situation. Maybe they're hungry. Maybe they're tired. Maybe they're thirsty. Maybe they're overwhelmed. The using scaffolding, when I move down to the second row, is the piece of helping parents to learn how to come alongside their child who has a lagging skill, whether it's social, emotional, cognitive, whatever skill it is that they're lagging, that rather than respond in traditional ways, we look at ways that we can come alongside them and help them to master that skill and move on ahead to catch up to their peers. The biggest one that I think is hard for people to embrace, but once they do, it's very liberating, is to take play seriously. We use play as a tool to redirect kids. We use it as a tool to help kids learn appropriate emotional and relational things that they need to learn. And we use play to connect with kids, because when a child is playing, or a 14-year-old is shooting hoops or shoe shopping or getting a manicure, their guard is down. And so in those are the moments in which you can make connections with them, and you can build some positive memories up in that upper brain. And so taking play seriously is a real fun one. And then the being present, this is interesting. So I teach this class in Rwanda with foster families in our program in Rwanda, and with our teachers in Rwanda. And this one I used to try to kind of skip over, because I feel like culturally Rwandans are very present. They're not like on their phones the way Americans are. And a couple weeks ago when I was in Rwanda, I had a headmaster say, no, Kara, you can't skip it, because all my young teachers that just graduated are all on their phones. So you cannot skip it. It's reaching us here. It's not exclusive to America. So I think that one speaks for itself, though. I'm not going to go over that. Then the responding thoughtfully is a really cool practice that I think all of us can maybe embrace, even if we don't take the class, is that when you are in a conflict with a child, or when you're disconnected, or you have an issue, that when you are back to a calm state and you're connected, that you're really reflecting on how could it have gone differently? How could I have prepared for that moment ahead of time so that it would have been easier for my kid and for me? What could I have done while it was happening? And I have really amazing experiences with my teenagers when we do this. And one of my teenage boys, he did a Q&A with some of my families last night, and he shared with these families the literal exact same moment that I had shared an hour before. So we both shared. He shared from the kid side, I shared from the parent side, the same conflict that we had, the same way in which we reflected together the next morning. And it's just gotten to be a rhythm in our house that I think has helped all of us to grow together, and be better listeners and more thoughtful. And along those lines, giving voice. My kids would tell you that that's probably the thing they wish that we would have known before, is that they never felt like they had a voice. And that when we were parenting them in traditional ways, they didn't feel like it mattered how they felt or what they were worried about. And so that is something, especially when you think about the attachment cycle and you think about a child who has had experiences in their lives where they could not express their voice. Gosh, like, what are we going to do to make them feel heard now? And then again, with that, repairing, reflecting, and adjusting. So these are, when you take a connection class or when you do a workshop, these are what we get you to feel comfortable at, and then put them all together into practice. And I can't tell you enough. It transformed my family's life for sure. You can go to the next slide. So this is my son E that I was referencing, that shared with my class last night. Etienne was adopted from Rwanda when he was, we're not really sure his age. He was somewhere between 3 and 5. And for the first 10 years of being his mom, I would never have said that God makes mistakes, because in my front of my brain, I would know that God doesn't make mistakes. But I think that in my heart, I probably believe that, because I thought we will never be able to be connected. We are like water and oil. We cannot mix. We had just a constant state of hypervigilance and fight and anger. And he would say that he hated me, and even the sound of my voice would upset him. And he was on track to being in an institution. And when we were at the very end, and we had been through so many therapists and meds and everything under the sun, that's when we started trying TBRI. And that's when we started to really see healing in our whole house. And you can see right now, like next to my husband, he's probably the next person in the world that knows me best, that can read me, and that I feel like has my back. And he's going to be 17 next week. And he's been trying real hard to let his dad give him permission to get a matching tattoo with me. So if that tells you how attached and healthy we are now, that he wants to get a matching tattoo with his mom. But part of the TBRI approach is seeing the need behind our kids' behavior. And so we really, when a child is having a hard time, they're having a hard time, they're not giving us a hard time. When they're having that hard time, we put on that curiosity lens and we think, do I need to feed this kid? When is the last time this kid had a good night's sleep? Is he in sensory overload or underload? Is he sick? Is school too hard? Is he just really angry about something else? Are the people that are around him people that really make him worried or nervous? Is this environment, like Sam's Club, is too loud and too much noise and too much stimulation? Or does he need to get out and run around for a while? Or maybe he needs to sit and snuggle for a while. This is the whole child approach, so that when we see a behavior, we're thinking, what is the unmet need? Is there an unmet need right now? Does that make sense with everybody? Yeah. Okay. You can go to the next one. And then, like I said, all behavior is communication. And when a child has a significant traumatic event or multiple events, their developmental age is going to be complicated. That just because a kid is 14 does not mean he's emotionally 14, that he's cognitively 14, that he's socially 14. His life experience may have made him learn how to cook dinner and change a baby's diaper and pay the bills. Or his life experiences may have made it so that he doesn't know how to talk to anybody, that he's scared of everyone. And so this is another really important piece to consider when you're looking at a kid's behavior. Like, well, where are they at? Like, am I being fair right now? Just because they're 14, maybe I shouldn't expect for them to be able to do what other 14-year-olds can do. You can go to the next one. Okay, so this is kind of what I was referencing. If a child needs nurture and I give him structure, I harm his ability to trust me. If a child needs structure and I give him nurture, I harm his ability to grow. Nurture and structure must be used hand in hand. And that's kind of like the nuts and bolts of all of this. You can go to the next one. Okay, this was the one I forgot. This was earlier tonight. It's not linear, and this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So this is my baby bird. She's 3.5. She's got her binky in. She doesn't have any pants on because we were potty trained. And then we had a foster care placement with us that set her completely back. And now she's got a terrible diaper rash. She's got her pacifier, and she's definitely not tracking with other 3.5-year-olds. But that's okay. Like, our expectations is that she feels safe and with us, and we'll nurture her and love on her, and we'll get her there. And I'm pretty confident she'll be potty trained when she goes to kindergarten. I'm not 100%, but that's okay. I'm not going to worry about it because she's healing. So that was that. I wanted to add that in tonight. And I think there might be one more slide. Okay, so this is, you can find me, my website is wholeheartedspace.com, and Wholehearted is the name of my Instagram. We do, my kids are pretty awesome to learn from because they're very open about their stories, and they're pretty self-aware, and they're very attuned. And so we do a lot of sharing and educating on there together. And I think we did okay on time. How are we on time, Kristen?
Yeah,
You did
we're good.
great. You did great.
Perfect. Okay.
This is
Oof, this
incredible.
is amazing.
You know, I'm a high school teacher, and I'll tell you, all of this applies to the kids I see on a daily basis. It's
Your wife and I talked about that because my husband teaches, I think 90% of his kids are under the poverty line, below the poverty line. So I bet you guys have a lot of the same hard stuff.